The leaves are turning on whatever planet you're on. We've got a new Star Wars show on the horizon, and it is the perfect season to slip back into our cozy little Qui-Gon Jinn alternate universe. Before we begin this video, quick reminder. This is part 2 of our timeline, where Qui-Gon survives Naboo. In part 1, we left him very much alive, guiding Anakin through the early Clone Wars, quietly tugging the Jedi away from blind obedience and back toward the living Force, and changing how the Council even dares to speak about the prophecy of the Chosen One. So if you've been waiting to see what happens next with Anakin, Qui-Gon, Dooku, and that smiling shadow named Palpatine, you're in the right place. Pull up a blanket, take a deep breath. We're going to slip right back into their world like we never left. This is our story, built by all of us. Shout out to the patrons keeping the holoprojectors on, to the voice actors who make these scenes feel like lost episodes, and to everyone in the comments who called their shots in part 1. Some of you predicted that Qui-Gon would sense Anakin's rage on Tatooine long before the Tusken camp. Some of you guessed he'd take Dooku's warnings on Geonosis seriously. And a few of you, somehow, already started sketching out a very different Order 66. By the will of the Force, this has turned into a shared story project. You told me what you thought Qui-Gon would say to a grieving Anakin under the twin suns. You looked at the Council and said, they won't change on their own. And in this timeline, they didn't. Qui-Gon made them. In part 1, we watched Anakin grow, not as a weapon, but as a person. Qui-Gon challenged the Council when they tried to make Anakin a symbol instead of a boy. He stood between him and the dark side on Tatooine. He stood between him and political manipulation when the Chancellor tried to get just a little too close. But now, our story begins to bend toward the era you've been waiting for. In this chapter, we are finally entering the Revenge of the Sith years, in a galaxy where Qui-Gon never fell on Naboo. The war is grinding everyone down. Dooku is more conflicted than ever. Ahsoka has choices to make. And Anakin is about to face the same visions, the same fears, and the same Chancellor, only with a very different voice in his ear. Order 66 is still coming. The clones are still sleeping with secrets in their heads. Palpatine still thinks he knows exactly how this ends. But with Qui-Gon Jinn alive, planning since Geonosis, the moment the guns turn may not play out the way anyone expects. So, are you ready to see what happens when the one Jedi who truly understands Anakin Skywalker is there on the day the galaxy falls? The what if restated. Qui-Gon, the Chosen One, and a different fall. Then, my loves, welcome back. Because this is the moment where our what if really sharpens into a blade. In one clean line, here's the premise we're living in. This is the Star Wars galaxy, where Qui-Gon Jinn survives the Phantom Menace, takes Anakin as his Padawan, never lets go of him, and everything we know about the fall of the Jedi tilts on its axis. That's it. One life saved on Naboo, one master who refuses to step away, and the future starts to burn a different color. Before we begin this video's next chapter, let's anchor where we are. In canon, Anakin falls because he's alone. He's isolated in the council chamber, unsupported in his fear for Padmé, and pulled between a rigid Jedi council and a smiling, poisonous chancellor. No one really hears him. No one really looks at him. Here, he has a mentor who does nothing but listen to the living Force and the boy in front of him. A Jedi who questions the council and actually understands why Anakin is afraid. Back in part 1, we watched that difference ripple outward. Qui-Gon clashed with the council from the first days of the Clone Wars, pushing back when they slid deeper into the role of generals instead of guardians. He heard Dooku's warnings on Geonosis, and instead of dismissing them, took a deep breath and treated his old master's words as a puzzle, not a lie. He caught the tremor in Anakin's voice on Tatooine, sensed the storm around Shmi, and forced a confrontation with Anakin's grief before the Tusken bloodlust could harden into shame. We also saw the beginnings of something the Old Order never dared to name. Qui-Gon didn't pretend Anakin's love for Padmé would vanish. He reframed it, attachment as fear, compassion as strength. A more flexible view on Jedi relationships started to form in quiet conversations on Coruscant balconies and in gunships between missions, where Qui-Gon told Anakin that the Force was bigger than any rule written in a council chamber. Now, our story begins its descent into the heart of the war. In Part 2, we're moving through the late Clone Wars into a reimagined revenge of the Sith. Coruscant under siege, a Chancellor whose mask is slipping, and a Jedi Order already split between obedience and doubt. We'll follow Qui-Gon and Anakin through the moment the clones turn, through a twisted, desperate version of Order 66, and into the long-term fate of the Jedi, of Anakin and Padmé, and yes, of Luke and Leia, in a galaxy that never knew Darth Vader the same way. By the will of the Force, this isn't just a highlight reel. You're getting a complete, emotionally coherent alternate timeline that asks whether Qui-Gon's survival actually saves the Jedi, how Palpatine adapts when his favorite pawn won't break the same way, and what it really means to bring balance when the fall still comes, but not on schedule. So, with that in mind, let's step into the final days of the Republic and see how long one stubborn Jedi Master can hold back the dark side. Housekeeping in the Jedi Temple, giveaways, shout-outs, and future what-ifs. But before Qui-Gon starts wrestling the fate of the entire Clone War, we need to take a quick walk through the temple halls and handle some business, my loves. Because by the will of the Force, this whole long-form timeline only exists thanks to our own little High Council. Our top patrons are basically sitting in those ring chairs right now. Grandmaster Tier, your Yoda and Mace arguing over prophecy. Master Tier, your Plo Koon and Shak Tai keeping everyone sane. Knight Tier, you're out there on the front lines like the 501st, holding the line while Anakin runs off on another wild hunch. Padawan Tier, you're the younglings sneaking into the archives after hours to watch forbidden holovids, like this one. If your name is on that patron scroll on screen, know this. Every time Qui-Gon defies the Council, every time Anakin takes a deep breath instead of diving into the dark side, it's because you kept the holoprojectors on. I genuinely thought about how to frame this series, and I told myself, if we're going to rewrite decades of Star Wars history, it has to feel like a story night in the Jedi Temple, funded by our own order. Now, housekeeping with a twist. We are running a series-wide giveaway tied to this Qui-Gon timeline. I've got a replica lightsaber hilt inspired by Qui-Gon's design, plus an art print of him and Anakin on the steps of the temple in this alternate reality. To enter, you just need to watch through to the end of this video. Somewhere in the final act, I'm going to drop a specific code phrase in universe. When you hear it, comment that phrase, plus which moment of Qui-Gon and Anakin's relationship hit you hardest. That's it. You're in. Quick pattern interrupt here. If you could sit in the council chamber and whisper one sentence into Anakin's ear before he meets the Chancellor, what would you say? That's the kind of influence I want you to have over this timeline. Your likes and subscribes are not just numbers. They're votes in the council chamber. If this episode crosses our like goal, I'll branch this universe into a mini-arc you all can choose. A redeemed Dooku trying to pull his former Padawan back from the brink. A fully reformed Jedi Council that actually listens to Qui-Gon. Or a very different Luke era, born into a galaxy where the Order never quite fell. And I cannot do this alone. Massive shout out to the voice actors, giving emotional weight to Qui-Gon, Anakin, and even our smug Chancellor. To the editors who cut this like a Clone Wars episode, and to the artists painting these holocron-style visuals. This isn't just a lore dump, it's a crafted story experience. So, welcome back to the narrative. Our story begins again in the heart of the Clone Wars, in a dimmed briefing room where Anakin is about to make a choice that Palpatine never saw coming. Because this time, Qui-Gon Jinn is standing at his shoulder, anchoring the timeline, where our galaxy stands before our OTS. Our story picks up in the 3rd year of the Clone Wars, as the Outer Rim sieges grind on, and whole sectors feel like they've been on fire for a lifetime. The Republic is tired, worlds are scared, and under the Chancellor's endless emergency powers, the Senate keeps voting away freedoms in the name of safety. People whisper that the Jedi are generals now, not guardians. They're grateful, they're afraid, and they're not sure which feeling is winning. In that dimmed briefing room on Coruscant, Anakin stands beside Qui-Gon as a holomap of the Outer Rim flickers. Worlds like Umbara, Maijito, and Saliukami glow with red markers, each one a wound. Commanders file in. Obi-Wan takes a seat. Anakin looks at his former master, then at the taller, calmer figure at his shoulder. Qui-Gon Jinn is still the most unorthodox general in the room. Qui-Gon has spent this war refusing to treat it like a numbers game. He redirects bombardments, pulls clones off meat grinder assaults, and walks into villages before the tanks do. He listens to the living force, not to Senate polls. He told the Council more than once that the war itself feels wrong, like a current pushing them towards something they can't see. He doesn't know the shape of the trap yet, but he knows there is one. Anakin feels that too. He's older now, scarred, but more centered than the version we remember. He still takes a deep breath before every briefing and thinks of Padmé on the veranda, of laughter instead of blaster fire. Their marriage is still a secret, but in this timeline, Qui-Gon is not blind. He has seen the way Anakin's thoughts drift, the way his voice softens when Padmé's name appears on a holo. And instead of crushing that attachment, Qui-Gon has chosen to guide it. He sits with Anakin between missions, talks about love, fear, and the dark side. He doesn't say, "Let go, or you're not a Jedi." He says, "Let's learn how to love without letting fear own you." It isn't perfect. Anakin still worries. He still dreams. But he is not alone inside those dreams anymore. Out beyond the Republic lines, another figure watches the war unfold. Count Dooku, Darth Tyrannus, still serves a hidden master. Yet in this timeline, Qui-Gon has reached out to him, twice through encrypted channels, once face-to-face on a shattered moon above Sereno. Their conversations are tense, half philosophy and half interrogation. Dooku sees the corruption Qui-Gon fears. Qui-Gon hears the bitterness that dragged his old master into the dark side. Neither man is sure if the other can still be saved. Neither man fully trusts the other's hand on a lightsaber hilt. By the will of the Force, the galaxy has become a chessboard. Palpatine sits at the center as Chancellor and secret Sith Master, nudging pieces with every crisis. The Jedi Council is divided. Some respect Qui-Gon's insight, others fear his defiance. The clones remain loyal, but years of brutal campaigns have left them uneasy. about orders that treat them like assets instead of people. Ahsoka, shaped early by Qui-Gon's compassion and his open criticism of the Order's failings, has already walked away once and come back on her own terms, more independent than ever. All of these threads are pulling tighter. Every choice, every doubt, every midnight conversation is converging on one night over Coruscant, when a kidnapping, a desperate rescue, and a single conversation in a hangar will decide whether the Jedi fall the way we remember, or in a way the Sith never prepared for at all. A different rescue. Over Coruscant, Qui-Gon, Dooku, and the first crack in Sidious's plan. And my loves, welcome back, because that night over Coruscant, this is where everything finally collides. Our story begins not in a quiet council chamber, but in fire. Star destroyers trade turbo laser volleys with separatist cruisers. Debris spinning through low orbit as panicked citizens watch from apartment windows far below. Anakin's starfighter cuts through the chaos, Obi-Wan right beside him. And in the rear cockpit of a retrofitted escort shuttle, Qui-Gon Jinn closes his eyes and reaches into the living force. He feels Anakin's focus. He feels Obi-Wan's worry. He feels something else too, a cold thread coiled around the Chancellor like a serpent. Before we begin this video, just remember, in the original timeline, Anakin flies into this battle already half claimed by that serpent. Here, he's not alone. Stay with him, Anakin. Qui-Gon's voice crackles through the comm, warm but firm. Don't let the battle choose your path. Anakin smiles despite the flak. He rolls his fighter to cover Obi-Wan, not because he's told to, but because that's what family does. 3 Jedi, 3 generations, moving as one small formation against a sky full of war. They crash land on the Invisible Hands hangar together. The doors blast open, super battle droids close in. Anakin leads with that same blazing talent, Obi-Wan with practiced precision, and Qui-Gon with almost casual grace. His green blade cutting only what must be cut. He looks at his former Padawan and his current one, and for a heartbeat, even in this chaos, he takes a deep breath and feels a fragile peace. This is what he fought the Council for. This is why he defied them on Tatooine. In the observation deck, the Chancellor is chained to his chair, playing the victim. Dooku descends from the shadows, cloaked in Sith authority. Anakin feels that old flare of anger, the memory of Geonosis, of lost clones and shattered ideals. Palpatine watches that anger like a starving man watches a feast. The duel is fast, brutal, familiar. Anakin and Obi-Wan move as a practiced pair. Qui-Gon steps in when Dooku's Makashi almost slips past Obi-Wan's guard. For a second, master and former apprentice lock blades. Their eyes meet. Recognition, grief, betrayal. "Master," Qui-Gon says, and the word hits harder than any strike. Dooku falters. Anakin takes his opening, disarms him, drives him to his knees. 2 blue blades cross at the Count's throat. Palpatine leans forward, eyes bright. "He's too dangerous to be kept alive, Anakin. You know what he's done." Anakin's knuckles whiten. He thinks of Tatooine, of the Tusken camp, of how close he once came to becoming exactly what the dark side wanted. He hears the Chancellor's words. He hears his own breath. And then he hears Qui-Gon. "No." The green blade snaps on, angled down, a barrier between Dooku and death. Qui-Gon's voice is low, but unshakable. "Anakin is a Jedi. He will not be your executioner." Palpatine turns, feigning confusion. "Master Jinn, with respect, this man leads the Separatists. He controls the Senate through fear." "Does he?" Qui-Gon presses, eyes never leaving Dooku. "Or does someone else? You spoke of a Sith controlling the Senate on Geonosis." Tell me now, Master, who is Sidious? Dooku looks from Qui-Gon to Anakin. He thought Qui-Gon dead. He thought this boy would be the Sith's perfect blade. The certainty cracks. The careful script Sidious wrote is suddenly wrong. You don't understand, Dooku begins, voice shaking. He is the Republic now. He is the war. He stops, realizing he's already said too much. Anakin feels the lie in the room, but this time he's not alone with it. Qui-Gon's presence is a steady anchor. Obi-Wan's doubt is open, honest. By the will of the Force, Anakin lowers his sabers. We take him in, Anakin says. Let the Council hear him. Let the Senate hear him. Palpatine's smile doesn't reach his eyes. The invisible hand begins its doomed descent. Alarms screaming as the ship tilts toward the city below. In the chaos of the crash landing, Dooku is bound, not beheaded. The heroes stagger out of the wreckage alive, smoke curling around them. Qui-Gon stands on the shattered landing ramp and closes his eyes. The disturbance isn't just in the Force. It's in a mind somewhere deep in the Senate district. A mind whose careful dominoes have stopped falling. Far above the rescue crews and fire ships, the Chancellor looks back at the burning wreck and recalculates. He's lost his disposable apprentice far too early. And for the first time in years, Darth Sidious feels something very close to surprise. Because now his war has a witness. The Council divided. Qui-Gon, Dooku's interrogation, and a dangerous truth. Welcome back, my loves. Before we begin this video section, just picture this. The most dangerous man in the galaxy is not the one in chains. Deep under the Jedi Temple, the air is cold. Stone, durasteel, humming shields. Dooku sits in a restraint field, wrists bound, elegant robes torn and singed. The Council has just cleared the war room upstairs. Masters file out in hushed clusters, leaving only a handful. Qui-Gon takes a deep breath in the corridor, one hand on the wall, the other wrapped loosely around his lightsaber. He was Dooku's Padawan. He knows that presence in the Force better than almost anyone alive. And he knows, with a certainty that makes his stomach twist, that they cannot just lock this man away and pretend the words he spoke on Geonosis were nothing. A Sith controls the Senate, a shadow behind the Chancellor. The Council wants calm. Qui-Gon wants truth. Inside the cell, Dooku looks up as the door hisses open. Mace Windu enters first, posture like a drawn blade, followed by Yoda in his hoverchair. Qui-Gon steps in last, the field shimmering between him and his former master. For a heartbeat, it's not a war criminal in front of him. It's the man who taught him to listen to the living Force. Count Dooku, Mace says, you claimed a Sith Lord directs this war from within the Republic. You will name him. Dooku's voice is rough, half broken, half defiant. I already have. Darth Sidious. He has been your unseen Chancellor longer than you realize. His eyes flick to Qui-Gon. There's a glint there, almost fond, almost predatory. Qui-Gon feels it. Regret. Real regret. Like bruises in the Force. But wrapped in it, coils of deception. He thought he was ready for this. He isn't. Who is he, Master? Qui-Gon asks quietly. What name does he wear in the Senate? Dooku smiles, thin and tired. If I hand you everything, the game ends too quickly. Sidious planned this war for years. He planned you, Qui-Gon. He planned the boy. Do you truly think removing one politician will save the Jedi? He refuses to say Palpatine. Not yet. He wants leverage. He wants to steer what comes next. Upstairs, the Council fractures. Mace is already hyper-focused on the Chancellor, replaying every meeting, every emergency power. Others stare at star maps and casualty reports and think of riots, secession, the Republic tearing itself apart if they accuse its leader without proof. Qui-Gon stands in the middle of that storm and refuses both extremes. No coup, no blind trust. A quiet, methodical investigation by the will of the Force. We test him, Qui-Gon tells them. We test everyone. We follow the trail Dooku has given us, but we do not become the very tyrants we fear. Anakin listens from the edge of the chamber, feeling the tension like static in his skin. Back in the cell, Dooku leans forward, voice low. You're already too late, my old Padawan. Sidious prepared a final contingency. The clones you lead. The Jedi you love. One command, and they all turn. Qui-Gon's heart stutters. How do you fight an enemy who might already be inside your army, your government, and maybe even your own order? And worse, how do you prove it before someone says that command? Anakin at the crossroads, visions, Padmé, and Qui-Gon's hardest lesson. Merry Life Day, my loves, welcome back. If Sidious can flip an entire galaxy with one sentence, what happens when the Force sends Anakin a vision that could flip him? And this time, he has someone to run to. Our story begins in darkness. Not the cold void of space, but the suffocating dark of Anakin's own mind. Padmé is screaming. Medical droids shout readings. The room blurs. He's holding her hand, and it's slipping away. And the more he reaches with the Force, the faster she fades. He hears himself begging. He hears a monitor flatline. Then nothing. Anakin jolted awake in his Coruscant apartment, chest heaving. For a heartbeat, he thought he was still there, in that nightmare delivery room. His hand flew to the bond he always felt with Padmé through the Force. Alive, calm, asleep across the city. He took a deep breath, but the terror didn't leave. It coiled. In canon, this is where Anakin would start lying, hiding, spiraling alone. Here, by the will of the Force, he throws on his cloak and does something completely different. He runs to the one person who has never turned away from his fear. The temple gardens are almost empty at this hour. Lanterns float over still water, and Coruscant's traffic hum becomes a distant storm. Qui-Gon is seated on a stone bench, eyes closed, simply listening to the night. He doesn't look surprised when Anakin appears. He just pats the bench beside him. Anakin sits, shaking. Words jam in his throat. He blurts everything at once. The visions. Padmé dying in childbirth. The marriage he hid. The baby he thinks might be coming. He waits for the anger. For the lecture. For the council voice that says, "You've failed." Instead, Qui-Gon takes a long, deep breath and really looks at him. Not as the chosen one, as his boy. "You thought I'd be furious," he says softly. "I'm worried, but not surprised. You love her. Of course you do." Anakin stares. The code. The code is a guide, Qui-Gon answers, not dismissing, not harsh. Attachment isn't the enemy, Anakin. Fear of loss is. Love can flow with the Force, or it can try to possess. The Council forgets that sometimes. So do we. He explains his living Force philosophy the way he always has. But now it cuts right to the wound. The Force lives in the now. It shows possibilities, not chains. These visions are not a curse meant to drive Anakin to desperation. They are a warning meant to invite clarity. Prepare. Be present. Strengthen Padmé. Don't cage her. Later, in the Chancellor's office, the contrast is brutal. Sidious's voice coils around the same fear. He talks of power over death, ancient Sith secrets, ways to keep those he loves from ever dying. He feeds the panic. He tells Anakin the future is fixed unless he seizes it with the dark side. Qui-Gon offers something harder: acceptance, training, meditation sessions where they sit with the vision instead of running from it. Quiet visits to Padmé, where Anakin is honest about his fear, and she places his hand over her heartbeat and tells him she trusts the Force too. For now, that makes the difference. Anakin chooses to trust his master over his chancellor. He resolves to protect Padmé not by chasing forbidden power in secret, but by deepening his connection to the light and refusing to lie to the one man who has always believed in him. But visions have a way of testing every promise, and the next trial will not be so gentle. Meditation, not manipulation. Qui-Gon versus Palpatine in the political arena. Our story begins, again, not in a battlefield, my loves, but in velvet shadows and whispered applause. The lights dim in the galaxy's opera house. Massive bubbles of color rise over the stage. Senators murmur. Advisors lean in. And there, in a private box high above it all, the three most important men in the galaxy take their seats: the Supreme Chancellor, the Chosen One, and the Jedi who refuses to leave him alone. Qui-Gon had insisted on coming. He told Anakin, quietly but firmly, that any private audience with the Chancellor while the war raged was political, whether Anakin liked it or not. Anakin thought he was overreacting, but he also remembered the way Qui-Gon had looked at Palpatine in the council chambers, that deep, measuring silence. So when the Chancellor's invitation arrived, Anakin took a deep breath and said he would attend, with his master. Palpatine smiles as they settle. He is gracious, warm, almost grandfatherly. He praises Anakin's heroism, the Outer Rim's sieges, his loyalty to the Republic. Then, almost casually, he begins to probe. He mentions how fragile life is, how war snatches loved ones away, how even the Jedi cannot stop death. In another timeline, this is where he unveils the tragedy of Darth Plagueis. Here, he only brushes its edges. A story about a certain philosopher who sought to bend the Force to his will, to stop those he loved from dying. He watches Anakin's face, sees the flicker of fear, the thought of Padmé, the tightening jaw. But this time, Anakin is not alone with that fear. Qui-Gon speaks before the hook can sink in. His voice is calm, almost conversational, but there is steel underneath. He asks the Chancellor what kind of galaxy would exist if one man could decide who lives and who dies. He redirects them to democracy, to the danger of absolute power cloaked in good intentions. He talks about how the Force is not a tool to be controlled, but a current to be trusted. Palpatine offers flattery and secret doors. Qui-Gon offers meditation exercises and uncomfortable questions. The Chancellor promises that with the right knowledge, Anakin could save everyone he loves. Qui-Gon quietly reminds him that attachment twisted into fear is the first step to the dark side, and that true power comes from surrender, not control. Anakin sits between them, feeling the pull. One voice tells him he deserves more. The other tells him he must let go. He knew what he wanted to hear. Sure, he didn't want to admit it, but every time Palpatine leans in, Qui-Gon is there. A living pattern interrupt, forcing him to examine why he wants this power at all. By the will of the Force, the conversation never becomes a one-way seduction. It becomes a three-way chess match. Every veiled hint about unnatural abilities hits the wall of Qui-Gon's questions. Every appeal to Anakin's ego is countered by a reminder of his responsibility. And as the opera swells, Palpatine realizes something dangerous. He can no longer isolate the Chosen One. the maverick Jedi will not yield. So, in the quiet corners of his mind, the Chancellor begins to pivot. If he cannot own Anakin Skywalker's soul, he will simply burn the Jedi Order down around him and make the boy choose in the ashes. The next move won't be a story in an opera box. It will be an order that changes the galaxy forever. Seeds of rebellion, Ahsoka, the clones, and Qui-Gon's quiet contingency. And that order, my loves, won't just fall on Anakin's shoulders. Because while the Chancellor sharpens his knife in the shadows, Qui-Gon Jinn is quietly, stubbornly, planting shields in places the Council doesn't even see. Our story begins for this section in a familiar hallway, the temple. Ahsoka Tano, walking between lines of marble columns, the weight of accusation on her back. In the original timeline, she walks alone. Here, she doesn't. Qui-Gon is at her side. He's already argued with the Council behind closed doors, already told them their fear of public doubt is not an excuse to sacrifice a Padawan's trust. He stands in the chamber and, by the will of the Force, openly criticizes their decision to let her take the fall. Anakin watches him. He's worried about her. He's furious at them. And then he sees his master refuse to smooth it over, refuse to make it sound reasonable. Qui-Gon takes a deep breath and says, in front of Windu and Yoda, that if Ahsoka does not feel safe here, she has every right to walk away and still be Jedi in the eyes of the Force. So when she leaves, it isn't a slammed door. It's a chosen path. He walks her down the steps, not as an exile, but as a knight stepping into a different kind of war. He presses a small, encrypted comm into her palm. He tells her he will answer, no matter what the Council says. Anakin looks at his Padawan, and for the first time he thinks leaving the Order doesn't have to mean falling to the dark side. It can mean listening to a different song in the same current. Months pass. Ahsoka takes odd jobs, helps small worlds the Republic forgot. Qui-Gon checks in between campaigns, never hovering, never judging. He calls her Jedi without hesitation. Through her, he starts to notice other sensitives on the fringes, a former Temple initiate running a clinic on Coruscant's lower levels, a Force-sensitive senator's aide on Alderaan. Without naming it, he's building something the Council never imagined, an informal web of allies, all tuned to the living Force, all outside Temple politics. Out on the front lines, that same instinct changes how he looks at the clones. On Camino, he watches rows of troopers march and feels wrongness. The Force is alive in them, bright and distinct, but muffled under conditioning. He sits with Rex in a gunship before a drop, asks about his dreams, asks if he's ever felt compelled to do something that didn't feel right. Rex hesitates, then admits there are gaps, moments where anger or obedience spikes for no reason. Qui-Gon doesn't know about Order 66 as a phrase, but he remembers Dooku's warnings on Geonosis, remembers his old master's sorrow when speaking of a Sith plan buried in the Republic's bones. He puts it together the way only someone who listens more than he lectures can. There is a command in these men, a hidden door in their minds, waiting for the wrong voice. So he starts preparing for the day that voice might speak. He nudges Anakin to establish private comm channels with trusted commanders. He quietly coordinates with Bail Organa, setting up refuge depots under the guise of war relief. He gives Ahsoka coordinates to safe houses on distant moons, asks her to remember the names of a handful of knights and senators who still question everything: Obi-Wan, Shakti, Plo Koon, Padmé, Bail. Anakin thinks he's just being cautious. Ahsoka thinks it's just Qui-Gon being Qui-Gon. The Council thinks he's overreacting to old wounds from Dooku. But somewhere in the Force, a storm is building, and Qui-Gon has already marked the few souls he believes can survive if the temple's light suddenly goes dark. The only thing he doesn't see yet is how close that darkness already is to Anakin's heart. The trap springs early, Palpatine unmasked and a fractured arrest. Merry Life Day, my loves. Welcome back. Before we begin this video's next turn into chaos, remember, in this timeline, Qui-Gon surviving doesn't stop the fall of the Republic. It just changes who's standing when the dust clears. Our story begins for this section in the High Council chamber. Late at night, coruscant lights burning like distant stars. Dooku's hollow flickers in the center of the room, his voice low, worn, and for once not hiding. He has not given them everything, but he has given them enough. A Sith Lord in the Senate, a conspiracy around Kamino, a name he never quite speaks, yet keeps circling, the Chancellor. Mace Windu looked from the flickering image to Qui-Gon. Yoda sat silent. Obi-Wan's jaw was tight. They all thought about years of war, about how every victory had somehow strengthened Palpatine. Circumstantial, yes, but stacked together with Dooku's half-confession and Qui-Gon's relentless warnings, it stopped feeling like paranoia and started feeling like pattern. The living Force is screaming, Qui-Gon told them. His voice was calm, but his hands weren't. The dark side coils around the Chancellor's office, around Anakin. If we delay, we lose both. He took a deep breath, met Mace's eyes, and didn't look away. You will not go without me. By the will of the Force, this confrontation decides the fate of the Order and the boy I brought to you. Mace hated that he agreed. He was the master of the Order. He should lead. But he also knew the shatterpoint he sensed in Anakin was now tangled with Qui-Gon's certainty. State the fact, clarify the fear, reframe the choice. They could confront the Chancellor as a suspect politician, or as a Sith Lord wearing a politician's face. So the lineup changed. No grand procession of 4 Jedi Masters marching to their doom. Instead, Mace, Qui-Gon, and 2 battle-hardened Masters from the front, Plo Koon and Depa Billaba, moving like a scalpel, not a hammer. Anakin was the missing piece by design. Qui-Gon found him in a quiet corridor, outside the med center where Padmé waited for news on a refugee bill. Anakin was worried about her. He'd been having visions again, not of her dying now, but of her standing alone in a burning Senate chamber. Qui-Gon put a hand on his shoulder. Stay with her, he told Anakin. Trust the Council for once. Trust me. Anakin wanted to argue. He thought he should be there. But the Force nudged him toward Padmé, and for the first time in a long time, he obeyed that softer pull. In the Chancellor's office, the mask dropped fast. No pretense. No slow reveal. Red blade. Screamed hatred. Palpatine moved like a storm, and the room became a killing ground. Plo fell first, impaled before his saber fully cleared. Depa's arm went spinning away, lightning chewing into her chest as she crumpled. Mace pressed in, Varpad drinking in the darkness, but Palpatine was ready for him this time. A twist, a slash, and Mace went down with a shattered knee and a burning line across his ribs, teeth clenched against a scream. Qui-Gon fought nothing like them. He broke rhythm. He stepped where the living Force whispered, not where form demanded. Short, sharp strikes, then long, flowing retreats that dragged Sidious across the room, away from the windows, away from the panic button under his desk. He let himself feel every current of fear and rage, not to use it, but to see where it would go next. A feint, a parry, a sudden kick to the desk controls. Lights flared. Surveillance fields snapped on. For a heartbeat, hollow recorders caught the Chancellor's yellow eyes and twisted face as Qui-Gon's blade finally sheared Palpatine's saber in half and burned a jagged line up his cheek. Palpatine shrieked. Lightning exploded from his hands, hurling Mace and Qui-Gon into opposite walls, charring the ceiling, shorting half the systems. The office filled with smoke and the smell of burned durasteel. The Jedi had him scarred and cornered, his Sith nature partially exposed, but not defeated. Outside, the Senate only saw fire alarms and scrambled security feeds. Inside, the Order only knew that something had gone terribly wrong. And far below, in Kaminoan-grown mines across the galaxy, a buried command waited in perfect silence for one word from their Chancellor. Execute. Order 66. Rewritten, betrayal, survival, and Qui-Gon's last stand. Welcome back, my loves. Before we begin this video's darkest turn, remember, in this timeline, Qui-Gon has been planning for the unthinkable since Geonosis. That preparation is the only reason anyone walks out of what's about to happen. Inside the Chancellor's office, lightning scarred the walls. Mace and Qui-Gon pressed Sidious. Blades crossed against his crackling hands. Anakin stood back, breathing hard, feeling the storm in the Force twist tighter and tighter. The Senate saw only alarms. The Council felt only confusion. And then the word left Palpatine's lips like a curse and a scream at the same time. Execute. Order 66. He didn't wait for a legal pretext. He didn't wait for a Senate vote. He triggered it early, wild, while still locked in combat with two Jedi Masters. Across the galaxy, clone officers snapped to attention as the Chancellor's image flickered into being, half-shadowed, half-Sith. The command hit those Kaminoan-grown minds like a hammer. On Kashyyyk, blaster muzzles swung toward Yoda. On Utapau, rifles rose behind Obi-Wan. On a dozen mid-rim worlds, Jedi generals turned at the sound of safeties clicking. But this time, something snagged. Cody hesitated for a fraction of a heartbeat, a memory of Qui-Gon's quiet talks about choice and conscience scraping against the implanted directive. A captain on Felucia misaimed by a meter. A squad on Saleukami fired a stunned volley instead of lethal. Tiny fractures. A few more Jedi dove for cover, survived the first wave, lived long enough to run. Anakin felt it before the first shot was fired. A tidal wave of betrayal slammed through the Force, thousands of familiar presences flaring with shock, then snuffing out. He staggered. Qui-Gon's blade wavered. Mace looked over, eyes narrowing as if he'd heard a distant scream. "Finish him!" Windu shouted. The Chancellor was on his back, mask slipping, eyes burning yellow. Qui-Gon looked at Sidious. Then he looked at Anakin. He'd waited decades for this moment, for the chance to end the Sith that had poisoned Dooku, the Republic, the prophecy itself. He knew what striking now would mean. He also knew the temple was burning in the currents of the Force. "The living, Anakin," Qui-Gon told him, voice rough. "We save the living." He broke away. By the will of the Force, Qui-Gon hurled himself through shattered glass, cushioning the fall with a desperate push. He hit a passing gunship hard, rolled, bones protesting. He was injured, exhausted, but moving. Anakin took one last, shaking look at the Chancellor sprawled under Mace's blade, then followed, diving into the chaos below. The temple was a war zone by the time they arrived. Smoke poured from upper spires. Gunships circled like vultures. Inside, clones, in blue and red markings, marched through marble corridors that had been quiet meditation halls an hour ago. Blaster fire echoed off statues of long-dead masters. Qui-Gon limped through the main hall, cloak torn, leaning slightly on the wall. Younglings clustered behind barricaded doors. Ahsoka, summoned back by a frantic encrypted call from Anakin, met them at the entrance, sabers already ignited, face pale. "Sky Guy, it's bad," she said. "They turned on us. All of them." Yoda appeared via holo from the Wookiee front, tiny green image flickering as blaster bolts flashed behind him. Obi-Wan's face joined the projection, wet with rain and soot, panting from his own escape. In a single, chaotic breath, they formed a plan. Evacuate the creche first, then any masters they could still reach, then scatter. The Jedi Order as they knew it was over. Survival was the only mission. Corridor by corridor, Qui-Gon coordinated, his voice steady even as his body shook. Anakin carved a path for Padmé and the youngest initiates toward a hidden hangar. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan flanked them, deflecting bolts that came from troopers they'd once called brothers. Some clones still hesitated, hands trembling, eyes glassy with conflict. Others did not. At the final blast door, with gunships touching down on the landing platform, someone had to stay. Someone had to hold the line long enough for the last transport, carrying Anakin, Padmé, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and a cluster of terrified younglings to clear Coruscant's atmosphere. Qui-Gon took a deep breath and stepped back from the ramp. "Master!" Anakin reached for him, panic flaring. "This is your path now," Qui-Gon said. "Go." The doors sealed. Blaster fire roared. The ship tore away into the night, and in the smoke-choked temple, as clone squads closed in on a lone green blade, the fate of Qui-Gon Jinn vanished from Anakin's senses, swallowed by static in the Force. Balance without a fall. Anakin's choice and the fate of Sidious smoke and fire swallowed the temple, and for a long time, Anakin thought that was it. Qui-Gon was gone. The line had finally snapped. But the Force wasn't done with Qui-Gon Jinn. He woke later on a med station aboard a captured cruiser, every breath like glass in his lungs, armorplast ceiling, harsh white light. His body was wrecked, burned along his side, one leg refusing to answer. Yet under all that pain, there was this quiet, a depth, the living Force humming louder than it ever had, like he'd stepped halfway into the realm of the dead and then refused to stay. "Welcome back," Obi-Wan told him softly, sitting at his bedside. Anakin stood behind, arms folded, trying not to look like a terrified Padawan again. Qui-Gon looked at them both and actually smiled. "We're still here," he whispered, "by the will of the Force." From that point, our story begins to narrow toward one last storm. The Purge had shattered the Jedi. Yoda was missing in the Outer Rim. The Council was scattered. But intelligence from Bail Organa and Padmé traced the heart of the chaos to one place. A damaged Star Destroyer hanging over a burning Coruscant, its command bridge turned into a throne room for the former Chancellor. Sidious. They went together. Obi-Wan, Anakin, Qui-Gon in simple robes, leaning on a staff instead of a saber, walking with a limp that told the truth of how close he'd come. Anakin took a deep breath in the shuttle, feeling the weight of Padmé's presence in the Force, the twin sparks of their unborn children like tiny stars behind him. Sidious was waiting on the ruined bridge, cloak torn, face fully revealed at last. Lightning scars traced the durasteel around him. The battle outside had turned the destroyer into a graveyard. Skywalker, he said, voice like oil. Look what the Jedi have done. Look what their war has cost you. His eyes flicked just once to Anakin's hand. Your wife, your children. Do you really think they'll be safe with an order that fears love? The words hit every old wound. Shmi, Geonosis, nightmares of Padmé dying. In another life, this was where he broke. He knew that. He could almost see the path, red and smoking. But this time, Qui-Gon was there. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply stepped forward, placing himself between Anakin and the Sith Lord, and Anakin felt that quiet depth again, that living, breathing river of the Force. You know he's lying, Qui-Gon told him, not even looking back. You saw it in meditation. Your fear is his weapon. Your love is not. Anakin closed his eyes. He saw Padmé laughing on the veranda, Luke and Leia as flickers of light. He saw himself as a monster on a Mustafar shore that never happened. I won't be your weapon, he said. Sidious struck first, lightning arcing toward Qui-Gon's broken frame. Anakin moved. Saber ignited. He caught the storm, teeth clenched, not pushing forward in rage, but holding, containing, protecting. Obi-Wan dove in from the side, blade flashing. The duel was brutal but small. 3 blue blades against 1 crimson storm, fought in the skeleton of a dying empire. Then came the moment. A misstep. Debris shifted under Sidious' feet. Anakin's strike knocked the red saber spinning away. The Sith Lord crashed to the deck, fingers sparking, too drained to summon another storm. Helpless. Every old script screamed in Anakin's mind. Kill him. End this. Take his power. Claim your family's safety. The dark side waited, patient. Anakin lowered his blade. No, he said. That's your way, not mine. He stepped back, keeping his saber ready, but refusing the killing blow. Obi-Wan moved in, binding Sidious with stunned clone's cuffs. Qui-Gon watched, eyes shining with something like pride and sorrow mixed together. With Sidious captured, his secret commands began to fracture. Some clones laid down their weapons, freed by seized control codes and Rex's quiet rebellion. Others kept fighting, but the storm had broken. There would be no clean, perfect purge. The Jedi Order survived, but changed. Temples in ruins. The Council humbled, listening now to the man who had always listened first to the living Force. Qui-Gon, scarred and half in another world. Anakin, who had faced the dark side and walked away. Obi-Wan, bridge between old and new. And somewhere safe, Padmé waited, hands over her stomach, feeling 3 heartbeats and knowing the galaxy her children would inherit was no longer Sidious's to shape. The war was ending, but the work of rebuilding, of redefining what it meant to be Jedi, was only just beginning, my loves. A new Jedi Order, Padmé, the twins, and the prophecy, fulfilled early. Welcome back, my loves. The war doesn't end with a single swing of a lightsaber. It ends in a Senate chamber that suddenly feels too small for the truth it's holding. Sidious is dragged into the light. Hollow recordings, confessions torn from corrupted archives, testimony from Jedi and clone officers who saw the orders, saw the manipulation, saw the Chancellor they trusted wearing a Sith's face. The Senate looks at itself and doesn't quite recognize what it became under his shadow. Bail Organa and Mon Mothma move fast. They call for commissions, for emergency powers to be rolled back, for the Grand Army to be demobilized before fear can invent a new enemy. Some senators demand more security, more oversight, more control. But the image of Palpatine smiling as he signed war decrees plays on repeat, and something in the chamber breaks. They thought they needed a strong chancellor. Now they want strong laws instead. Qui-Gon watches all of this from the visitors' gallery, cloak hanging a little heavier than it used to. He takes a deep breath and feels the currents of the living force shifting. The Republic survives, but only just, and only because people choose to admit they were wrong. In the Jedi Temple, scarred but not burning, another reckoning begins. Qui-Gon doesn't seize the council. He nudges it. Yoda steps back from constant politics. Obi-Wan spends more time among the younglings than the generals. The Order shrinks on purpose. Fewer temples on capital worlds. More enclaves on ordinary planets, where Jedi help rebuild farms, med centers, and trust. Attachment is no longer a word spoken like a crime. Qui-Gon reframes it. Love is natural. Love is allowed. Possessiveness, fear of loss, the urge to control, that is where the dark side coils. Anakin listens as Qui-Gon tells the council that hiding love only feeds fear. They don't all agree, but they agree enough. Which is why, when the war ends, Anakin and Padmé don't have to lie forever. It doesn't happen overnight. At first, their marriage is a quiet rumor, a thing known in looks and half-finished sentences. Then medroids, proper care, and the absence of Sidious' suffocating influence turn those old visions into smoke. Padmé does not die. She labors in a calm, guarded wing on Naboo, while Anakin sits beside her, fingers trembling, reaching for the Force every time she cries out. Luke is born, then Leia, two tiny presences that feel like twin suns in his mind. The galaxy meets them not as orphans of a fallen monster, but as the children of a scarred hero who almost lost himself and didn't. Their existence becomes public slowly, first to the Order, then to the Senate. There are speeches, there are arguments, there is, eventually, acceptance. Later, on a quiet balcony, Anakin stands with Yoda and Qui-Gon, watching Coruscant's traffic flow like rivers of light. He thought balance meant killing Sith. Yoda admits he once did too. But Sidious died, and the dark side did not vanish. It retreated, waiting for cracks. Balance, Qui-Gon says, was Anakin choosing trust over power in that critical moment, refusing to rule, refusing to cling, breaking the cycle of secrets that let the Sith grow in silence. The prophecy wasn't about a single duel. It was about changing the way Jedi and the Republic relate to fear. Years pass. Luke and Leia grow up wandering temple halls and Senate corridors, sparring with training remotes one day and watching committee debates the next. Anakin teaches them to listen to the Force. Padmé teaches them to listen to people. Ahsoka drops in and out like a comet. Part of the Order, part of the wider galaxy, always the bridge. And in the unknown regions, in forgotten cults, and scattered imperial remnants that never quite formed an empire, shadows still stir. They whisper of ancient powers, of dark side gods, of a chance to rise again. The galaxy is at peace, for now, but the children of Skywalker are growing. And by the will of the Force, this fragile balance will not go untested forever. What this timeline tells us about destiny, choice, and the Force. Merry Life Day, my loves, welcome back. If you've stayed with me through all these twists, you've basically done the Jedi trials from your couch. And yes, there may or may not be a little giveaway waiting at the end of part 3. So what does this brighter, stranger timeline actually tell us about destiny, choice, and the Force? In canon, Anakin's path is a slow suffocation. He's afraid, he's isolated, and every time he reaches out, the hand that answers is the Chancellor's. Fear turns to secrecy, secrecy to anger, anger to tyranny. Here, that fear is still there. The visions of Padmé dying still claw at his sleep. The Tusken pain still lives in his chest, but there is always one stubborn presence who refuses to let him drown in it. Qui-Gon looks him in the eye, tells him to take a deep breath, and demands that he speak the thing he's most afraid to say. That doesn't erase suffering, it redirects it. Instead of his pain detonating outward as a weapon, it becomes fuel for growth and eventually for communal healing. The Council doesn't just see the chosen one. They're forced to see the boy who misses his mother, the husband who's terrified of loss, the father who doesn't want his children to inherit a broken galaxy. Qui-Gon is the catalyst, not the cure. His survival doesn't magically fix the Jedi. Mace is still rigid, Yoda still cautious, the Order still entangled in a war it never wanted. But from Geonosis onward, Qui-Gon is that constant grain of sand in the Council's boot. He listens to Dooku and recognizes the truth in his warnings. He pushes the Council to feel the living force instead of hiding behind doctrine. By the time Order 66 hits, they've already begun to bend, just enough that they don't shatter completely. And underneath it all is this simple idea. The Force offers possibilities, not guarantees. The prophecy doesn't force Anakin to do anything. The visions of Padmé's death aren't a script. They're a crossroads. In the canon timeline, Anakin hears them and thinks control is the only answer. In this one, when he confesses everything, Qui-Gon doesn't give him a technique. He gives him a choice: trust and vulnerability over control and secrecy. The war, the Sith, even Abeloth later on, each becomes a test of whether Anakin will grip tighter or open his hand. But even by the will of the Force, a gentler path is not a painless one. The purge still comes. Clones still turn their rifles on friends. Temple halls still burn. The Republic still staggers on the edge of collapse. Saving Anakin doesn't erase all darkness. It just changes how it's faced, turning one man's fall into a shared burden that the whole Order and eventually his family carries together. So as we close this chapter, think about which single decision felt most pivotal in this part 2. Was it Qui-Gon insisting on capturing Dooku instead of cutting him down? Was it that quiet, shattering moment when Anakin finally admits his visions and Qui-Gon responds with compassion instead of condemnation? Or was it the altered arrest of Palpatine, where Anakin stands with the Jedi instead of between them and the Chancellor? Our story begins with one's survival on Naboo, but it's built out of hundreds of tiny second chances. The kind we recognize in real life when a mentor listens, when someone believes we can still choose the light. And in part 3, we're going to push that light to its breaking point. Closing the holocron, giveaway code, next what if, and farewell. So, my loves, if you're still here after an entire rewritten Revenge of the Sith and a very different Order 66, you are officially veterans of the Qui-Gon timeline. You've walked with him from Naboo to the temple purge that wasn't, and you've watched Anakin look at the dark side and choose again and again to breathe, to listen, to trust. For everyone who's been with me since part 1, welcome back in the truest sense. You know every tiny fracture that led here. You remember the altered Tusken camp, the tense conversations with the Council, the way Dooku hesitated when he felt his old Padawan in the Force. And if this is your first step into this universe, I'm so glad you jumped in at the deep end with us. Before we begin this video's goodbye, we need to talk about our little holocron giveaway. I wanted the code for this one to come from a moment that really defined Qui-Gon and Anakin in this part of the story. On the temple balcony, when Coruscant was quiet for the first time after the clones turned and failed to break the Jedi, Qui-Gon told Anakin very softly that fear is just the force we haven't listened to yet. Anakin took a deep breath, looked out over the city, and believed him. So, to enter the giveaway, drop that exact phrase in the comments. Fear is just the force we haven't listened to yet. Work it into a sentence, make it a quote wall, whisper it like a Jedi mantra, whatever you like. I'll pull a winner by the will of the Force and announce it in the community tab and at the start of part 3. While you're down there, I really want to hear from you. Which single choice do you think Qui-Gon changed the most? Was it the way he shielded Anakin from the Chancellor's grooming? The quiet preparation for Order 66 that saved so many younglings? Or the way he refused to let the Council turn Luke and Leia into symbols instead of children? Tell me what hit you hardest. And then, help me choose our next branch. Do we follow a redeemed Dooku who finally turns his doubts into open rebellion against Sidious? Do we jump forward to a Luke raised inside a surviving Jedi Order, sparring in the same training rooms where his father once paced? Or do we wait and watch a grey Jedi Ahsoka era unfold under the guidance of a living Qui-Gon who never stopped questioning? If you want to keep this little order of long-form what-ifs alive, you know what to do. Like the video if this timeline made you feel something, subscribe. If you want to see where Anakin, Padmé, Ahsoka, and the twins go next, and share it with that one friend who still argues about the prophecy in Discord at 2 a.m. You're not just feeding an algorithm here. You're joining the circle of Jedi who keep this story going. So picture this as we close the holocron. Years from now, in this reality, an older Qui-Gon stands in a sunlit temple courtyard. Luke and Leia circle each other with practiced sabers, laughing, their blades crossing in harmless sparks. Anakin watches from the steps, arms folded, eyes soft. For a moment, there is no war, no chancellor, no prophecy, only the living force moving through a family that survived. Somewhere in the multiverse, this is how it happened. And we'll be back very soon to open another holocron and test just how far even this brighter path can bend before it breaks.